Thanks very much for spending your noon hour with us today. I know that many of you have joined our previous town halls, which featured Senator Cornyn, Texas Workforce Commission representatives, the Littler Law Firm, Edelman, Access, and more. We've had tremendous attendance at these. If this is your first time joining, thanks very much for doing so. And Toyota is proud to serve as the sponsor of today's installment of this series. You know, Dale and I spoke last week about these virtual events, and we said, hey, why not have sponsors for these events just like we do for our in-person events? So we're glad to kick that off, and I encourage my fellow DRC member companies to do the same thing going forward for future events. Now, as many of you know, Toyota has been a DRC member since the minute our boots hit the ground here in Texas. And now more than ever, we can see the benefits of our move to Texas. The consolidation of our multiple headquarters to one has allowed us to react more quickly and to collaborate more effectively as we moved into the uncharted territory that COVID-19 is bringing to all of us. These are challenging times without question, but similarly, we understand that if we pull together as a region, we'll get through this and we'll see better days ahead once again. And the DRC has been a constant for more than 110 years, supporting businesses in the Dallas region in both good times and in bad. Dale, I thank you and your team for all the work you've done during the greatest public health crisis of all of our lifetimes. And I know as we begin the conversation and begin moving forward on returning to work safely, the DRC will be a leading voice in how to do that the right way. Now, of course, the U.S. Congress has been very, very busy at their work as well. So today we're going to focus on the $2 trillion CARES Act passed by Congress and signed into law by the president last month, as well as the interim coronavirus aid package signed into law just last week. Since its passage, many small businesses are grappling with stringent timelines, questions around how they'll meet payroll and meet all the new guidelines to reopen. Now, to delve deeply into these questions, we're honored to welcome our friend, U.S. Congressman representing the 32nd District of Texas, Colin Allred. Thank you very much for being here. Now, let's talk just a bit about today's format before we get going. The Congressman will share some remarks, and then we'll open up the conversation for questions from those tuning into the call, and Matt Garcia will moderate the discussion. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to send your questions to our panelists. We'll plan to wrap up around 12:45 today. So now it's my honor to introduce U.S. Congressman Colin Allred. The Congressman, a Dallas native, has represented his home district since being elected in November of 2018 after a career playing in the NFL and as a general counsel with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. He's dedicated the next chapter of his life to public service. And Congressman, I'll note, thanks to your former employers at the NFL for bringing us a little bit of fun this past weekend, a nice distraction from everything we've been dealing with. And I have to say, I was really happy with the Cowboys draft.
Yeah, it was a good draft.
I know everyone on this call can agree that Dallas is fortunate to have U.S. Congressman Allred representing Dallas. From day one in the job, he's been accessible and ready to work on the important issues impacting his district, the region, and the state. From trade to transportation, we can count on him to listen and make the right votes for the region. And Toyota is particularly appreciative of his work on USMCA. Additionally, given Toyota's active engagement with the veterans community, we applaud him for his work to make the Garland VA Medical Center a reality. Thank you for bringing this project over the finish line. So for these reasons, many others, we're so grateful to have you with us today, Congressman. And now I'll turn it over to Matt.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you to Toyota for sponsoring today's event. Let's go ahead and get started. Congressman, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule. We have a lot of good questions here and a good representation of the business community here in North Texas. So let's get started. So as Chris mentioned, Friday we saw the next installment of stimulus funding for PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and the SBA is going to start processing those applications today. In round one, PPP loans, we saw that small businesses were classified at 500 or less employees. This classification remained in the bill signed Friday by President Trump? And if so, what measures were put in place for this round of funding to ensure more small businesses get fair access to these funds?
Thank you so much, Matt, for having me, and to Chris and Dale and to the entire DRC. Thank you for everything that y'all have done. Toyota has been so incredibly helpful throughout this crisis and before, and the Dallas Regional Chamber, I just can't thank you enough for what you're doing and helping folks find jobs and supporting so much of what we're trying to do here in North Texas. I just got to start off by saying that. So in terms of the classification of small businesses, it's still 500 and under in this bill. But we heard, as I'm sure y'all have, so many reports from many of our small businesses saying they were having a hard time getting access to the PPP funding, even though they were going to their banks that they even sometimes had previous relationships with. And from what we have seen both anecdotally and with some numbers that we're starting to get back, it looks like some of our local banks did a better job, actually, at least in terms of getting the money out there, than some of our larger national banks. Now, there's different experiences that I've heard from different people, but that's been, I'd say, on average, the story. And so what we did do in this next new bill that just passed is we did set aside about $60 billion for mid-sized and smaller financial institutions, credit unions, and even micro lenders who can get into some of these real mom and pop shops, the smaller businesses that are out there, and try and make sure that we spread this money out as much as we can, because our goal with the PPP program was to try and help every small business keep their employees on the books as we go through this crisis. And obviously in the first round, that didn't happen. And we're trying to make sure that in the second round here that we get better at this. And I do think that we should recognize this is a new program. It's the first time that we've done something like this. We stood it up in about a week. And there's always going to be some problems with that. That's okay, in my opinion. We anticipate there'll be problems. So what we have to do is learn from those problems. And that's what we're trying to do.
The first tranche of funding lasted about a week before it dried up. Early estimates show this round lasting 4 to 6 days as well. Can we expect further rounds of PPP funding down the road? There's a lot of small businesses that I think are trying to apply, and obviously not everyone's going to have their needs met this round.
Yes. No, that's true. Obviously, the money last time went very quickly, but part of the problem also was that a lot of money went to a few lendees. So one stat that I heard was about 4% of lendees getting 45% of the funds. And that also was not the intention of the program. So the Treasury Department has recently issued guidance to stop some of these large companies like Ruth's Chris, which received $20 million, and a few other restaurant chains that received $20 million or more. So if you're publicly traded, you have to certify that you need the funding or to give the funding back. And so we're trying to make sure that we don't have that same problem. But we will, I believe we will certainly have to add more to the PPP program because the economic pain is going to be continuing. Now, I want to also, as I know you know, Matt, mention the economic injury disaster loans through SBA, because we did add about $60 billion as well to that. $10 billion for the $10,000 grants program that they have, and $50 billion for the EIDL economic injury disaster loan program. And so PPP is one funding source that small businesses can turn to. The EIDL program is the other, going through SBA. And EIDL actually covers a larger range of costs. And so I've just been encouraging all of our chambers and all of our folks who are in touch with our small businesses to make sure that they are trying to pull from all of the various sources that we have available and not just PPP.
Gotcha. Thank you. We also saw many businesses that applied in the first round, received their SBA certification, were ready to go, and then unfortunately funds ran out. With this next round, will those businesses that already received that SBA certification, will they have the first crack at SBA funds and start at the head of the line? How does that piece of the process work?
Well, the program as it was set up is first come, first serve. And I think we could have a discussion about whether or not that was the most efficient way to go about doing it. I have some issues with that because I think it does get the money out to the most sophisticated entities first. But that is the program. And we've done a bunch of these webinars and worked closely with SBA, and we've been told that if you have that certification, then you are already in line, and you need to contact your lender to just find out basically where you are in the process. So you should not have to reapply, and you should be ahead of anyone who is now applying currently, because you applied before them. And so first come, first serve, you should be first there. But I've also heard from some folks who are having a hard time hearing back from their lenders. And that's a problem that definitely bothers me and that we want to know more about. And so I've been asking on all these events that I do with our various chambers for small business owners, if they're having issues with particular banks, to let us know. There may not be anything that we can do directly to get into the inner workings of a bank, but if we start seeing a trend of certain banks not communicating here in North Texas, then we may be able to some of my colleagues to join me in shining a light on that issue, and maybe we can get some better communication going, because I don't want folks to be wondering if they are even being considered for these loans when they have gone through what I know is a pretty arduous process of just getting the application in.
Perfect. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, had 12% unemployment to end 2020. We've seen massive unemployment as the pandemic has spread. What can we expect from Congress and these future stimulus bills to help Americans going forward, especially those that may be unemployed for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, well, we are in what we're calling the mitigation phase, and I want to be very clear. This, to me, is driven by the public health side of this, and I've been trying to say this in every forum that I appear, through my social media channels, certainly, that our economic future is tied to our public health future, and that we have to make sure that we give consumers confidence to engage in the economy, and then they will be able, we'll be able to reopen our economy, and it won't just be at a fraction of the economy, and we'll actually have folks getting out there and spending money and doing the things that we know we're going to have to do to come back from this. And so that's the biggest thing that I think we have to get over. There's some ambitious plans that are going on to try and dramatically ramp up our testing capacity, tracing capacity, and treatment. And by treatment, I also mean quarantining and making sure that we keep folks safe, and so that people have more confidence in engaging in their economy. But the recovery phase of this, we're in the mitigation phase now. The recovery phase of this is going to be critically important, and we really need to be thinking right now about how we're going to best recover from this crisis. And so we've had those discussions, and I think we have to think big. The chairman of the Federal Reserve has told the speaker and the majority leader in the Senate to think big, because interest rates are low, and this has been a crisis that's really unprecedented. We've never had this sort of demand issue in which, even if we reopen, the question is, will there be enough demand to get the economy going? And so we're going to have to move aggressively and think, I think, on a large scale. And infrastructure is certainly a big part of that. You probably have seen the president has mentioned he wants to do that. My colleagues and I have been having discussions about that and already have drawn up basically what we think a package could look like. And so infrastructure is one of the best ways for us to do recovery spending. But there will be multiple components of this, and it's going to take us a long time. And I also want to stress that this is going to be a long process to get through this crisis, and it's going to be a long time to come out of it. And all of us have to be prepared for that. And as lawmakers and as policymakers, we are certainly thinking that way, because we recognize this is an unprecedented crisis. It's not like a 9/11 event or anything like that, where it's a single event in which there's certainly repercussions that echo, but in which the event happens and it ends. This is something that is an extended crisis, and so it presents really different challenges for us.
I'm glad you brought up the infrastructure topic there. We have several businesses, several member companies that play very largely in the infrastructure recovery. North Texas in particular, with it being such a fast-growing region of the United States, and if we do recover from the coronavirus pandemic faster than some other areas of the country, we can probably expect to see some more business relocations and increase in residents relocating to North Texas. What can we, is this an opportunity for the region, like you said, to fast track some of these infrastructure projects that have been on the sidelines to help meet that growing demand here in the near term?
I think so. You know, our biggest hurdle that we've had as we've tried to get an infrastructure deal in my first year and almost a half in Congress was revenue issues, concerns about how we're going to pay for it, where was the money going to come from, things like that. Obviously, talking about a recovery package and trying to stimulate the economy, how you're going to pay for it isn't actually the first consideration. I still think we're going to have to consider that, but it's a secondary consideration because we're really trying to move people back into work. And so for us, this is going to be a chance for us, I think, to leverage what is already significant private investment in Texas and particularly in North Texas, and use public money to leverage that to get even more done. And so we've got some enormous needs that we've been discussing for some time, and that I know a lot of your members of the Dallas Regional Chamber are certainly aware of and have been working on. And we've been very creative in North Texas in how we funded our infrastructure. But we need a lot more federal help if we're going to really think big and deal with our growth that really is not going to stop. In fact, I think that as we emerge from this crisis, as you mentioned, we have been such a magnet for business and for people coming here to work that we'll probably continue to be that because of some of the strengths of our economy that really are going to be there regardless of this crisis. And so I think we may end up having an even larger influx coming out of this crisis of folks moving to North Texas. And that's a great thing, but it's also a challenge for us in terms of keeping up on our infrastructure side. It's not just our roads and our highways and all that, certainly of great interest to me, but it's also, you know, our electrical grid, our water systems, how are we going to keep up with that on the back end? I want to see us expand high-speed internet. I think that this crisis, if it's shown anything, it has certainly shown, you know, that if we're asking kids to learn from home, for people to work from home, to engage in this economy, you have to have access to high-speed internet. So I think that's going to be a component of it. We're going to have to rebuild and build a lot of things as well to make sure that we can, you know, get back on track. And so there really almost every avenue of infrastructure, both the seen and unseen, I think is going to have to be beefed up and addressed for us here in North Texas. So I'm hoping that with Eddie Bernice Johnson and I both being on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, that we can draw down some of those funds for us.
Absolutely. You know, the vast majority of North Texas cities and the state of Texas are expecting a massive downward budget revision due to a loss in sales tax revenue. Last week, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell stated he was open to some states pursuing a bankruptcy route. You know, will we see more federal funding for local and state governments, or does this become a point of contention in future negotiations?
Yeah, unfortunately, it has been a point of contention. That's one of the things that held up the last bill was our efforts to try and get funding for states and localities. And I want to explain this because I think that there's some misunderstanding around how this operates. We created in the first CARES Act $150 billion for states and localities for new costs dealing with the coronavirus. So new costs they had incurred dealing with it. That's what that fund is for. It does not cover lost revenue from the crisis. And so, as you mentioned, both locally and statewide, we're going to have tremendous loss in revenue. And it's not just us, it's every state and every locality around the country. We also, of course, have the energy component that I'm sure we might discuss as well. So we're seeing a big loss in revenue. And what does that mean? Well, states and cities and counties can't have run a deficit. They have to have a balanced budget, unlike the federal government. So they can't just borrow and go into debt. They have to cut services. And so, you know, what services are we talking about? You know, we're talking about firefighters and EMTs. We're talking about people who are on the front lines right now. We're talking about teachers around the country. We're talking about people who are doing the critical work right now to try to get us through this crisis. So if there's any time not to turn our back on them, I think it would be now. And so this is an issue where I know that Secretary Mnuchin and the administration, I think, feel differently in some ways than Senator McConnell does. So the speaker said that she thinks that we're going to get something with the administration, reach an agreement. I was on a call just a few days ago with Governor Abbott and the Texas delegation, and he encouraged the entire Texas delegation, Republicans and Democrats, to try and get this funding for Texas. So I don't think it should be a partisan issue, and I hope that we will find a resolution to this, because this is not a time for us to be cutting budgets. And I'll make one last point. About 13% of our workforce is employed by these entities. So we're already talking about huge unemployment numbers. You want to talk about adding to that, then don't fund these critical services.
Gotcha. Completely agree on that point. Thank you. The National Restaurant Association has asked for 240 billion to be included in the next round of stimulus funding for a food service recovery fund. The National Restaurant Association states that 8 million workers have been laid off since the outbreak began, and in order to survive infusion of capital. Do you anticipate more groups seeking industry-specific stimulus money going forward?
I do, especially any group representing business entities where people have to gather. You know, anything that has to be done with in-person gathering, I think that industry is going to suffer, and it's not just going to suffer during this period. It's going to suffer for months until people have the confidence and we have the recommendations to be able to gather in large groups. And I'll mention that Dr. Burks of the White House Task Force said that she thinks that our social distancing guidelines, at least in terms of gatherings, will be in place certainly through the summer. And I've heard from a lot of experts who think this may be, you know, a year before we're able to, or even more, before we can gather in large groups with confidence. And so I absolutely do think that we'll likely see those industries deeply impacted. And I've heard some really frightening statistics, and just for Dallas restaurants, that we're considering that maybe 30 to 40% of our restaurants may not reopen in Dallas, and that scares me. And so we have to make sure that we take care of this industry, because we're going to want it, number one, and number two, because it does employ so many people, and it's a critical part of our economy. We've become a destination in part in Dallas by people wanting to come here and engage in our culture, you know, eat at our great restaurants, go to some of our attractions. That's part of our overall tourism economy that we have that does drive billions of dollars in North Texas. And we want to make sure we still have that in place. So I'm supportive of trying to make sure we keep these industries alive through this. And I recognize that some of it's going to have to change, even with the governor's orders coming out later today. We're going to have to probably change the way we go about our business together for a little while until we get through this crisis. And so restaurants will have to change as well. But I'm hoping that we can do this in a way that allows business to flow without risking public health. And so that's going to require us all to continue to practice our best guidelines following and all of that. But for our businesses, they're going to have to change a little bit too, how they conduct themselves, so we can get through this period, because, as I said, we're going to want them when we come out of it.
Congressman, earlier you mentioned energy. Particularly here in Texas, we've seen a rapid decline in oil prices. And it's a combination of international affairs and COVID-19 that's helped drive this nosedive. Some congressional members have advocated for providing the Department of Energy about $3 billion to replenish the National Reserve. Is this the correct move, or are there other avenues that we could try to help the oil?
Well, it's something that I'm looking at very closely, and I probably will end up supporting, because I do think that it's a smart way for us both to replenish the reserve at a low cost, honestly, and also that we got to make sure that we continue to have our energy independence. And I consider this to be an aspect of national security. I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee and on the Middle East Subcommittee in particular. And I think that we have been able to be much more flexible in our foreign relations, in part because we are not as reliant anymore on foreign sources of energy. And so our domestic production, particularly for Texas, has been a miracle, and has driven so much of our economy. And you're right, we've hit a perfect storm with this crisis, where demand has been deeply impacted, and of course we also had an ongoing international kind of situation that needed to be dealt with. And so Congress is going to have to make some smart moves here to try and help us again get through this. But all of these things, in my opinion, every industry we're talking about, every sector of our economy that we're talking about, it's all dependent on us as quickly as possible getting a handle on our public health future. And so that's why I choose to try and become sort of an advocate so much for dramatically increasing our testing, tracing, and treatment capabilities, which is what countries like South Korea and others have done to allow them to emerge some, even though they're not back to normal. They've emerged from crises that we're facing, because all of these things, the longer it goes on, the deeper the economic pain is going to be, the less flexibility we're going to have at the government level to be able to address it. The best thing we can do is to try to get the economy going again, but that's not going to happen until people have the confidence to engage in the economy, and that's dependent on us getting a handle on the public health side.
First of all, thank you for all your work in Congress to help get that passed. Several, trade's a big deal here in Texas. It makes up a big part of our economy. Several of our chamber members are very instrumental in that, and want to make sure that we have strong trade with Mexico and Canada. And I believe the U.S. Trade Rep on Friday informed Congress that all obligations have been met, that USMCA can go ahead and be implemented July 1st. But given the pandemic we're in right now, do you see that being delayed at all, or do you think July 1st is still a good time?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Some things are likely going to be delayed, some aspects of it. But I do think that, the overall framework is strong, and that's the most important thing, that it's going to be implemented. And, the thing that we also have to remember, is that we are not only the most important economy in the region, we're also the most important public health sector and public health distributor in our region. And so we were on a foreign affairs call last week talking about what's going to happen to the Southern Hemisphere and what's going to happen in our developing world as this crisis that's hitting us hits them. And if you think that we were caught unawares, you can't imagine how unprepared Mexico is, for example, for this crisis. And for our manufacturing chains that we have, and we have Lennox Air Conditioning, for example, in my district in Richardson, that has coils that are done in Mexico that come across the border. They have multiple supply chains across the border before it ends up in your air conditioning, keeping us cool in Dallas. It's possible that they will be, and that any other manufacturer can be impacted if we don't make sure that we help our neighbors get through this crisis too. So I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but for us, the most important thing is that we win domestically over this virus, and then that we help the rest of the world as well, because they're not only part of our supply chains, they're also our markets as well. And so, it's just really critical for our overall economy. The International Monetary Fund has already said that we are entering a global recession, and that's going to be exacerbated, of course, if we see really severe outbreaks in countries that don't have the medical capacity that we do. So we're going to have to do what we always have done, which is lead the world out of a crisis. And that's going to require the United States to be as big and as bold as we always have been in the past whenever we've been met by a crisis like this.
As you mentioned earlier, Governor Abbott's having this press conference this afternoon, I believe at 2:30 Central Time, to announce what many believe of restrictions here in Texas. I think the vast majority of Texans want to see us come out of this healthy, strong, and even stronger for the future. In addition to increased testing capacity, what else do you think needs to be done to reopen the Texas economy so we can prevent a further surge or an additional surge in COVID-19 cases?
Yeah, and this is going to be, we're going to have to be honest with folks, and that means talking about how hard this is really going to be, because I think that the social distancing guidelines that we put in place, the stay-at-home orders that we put in place, were intended to buy our health system time to deal with the spike that was anticipated that we were going to get. And we did, and we have, and we are currently going through that. I think the numbers are 938,000 Americans have been infected. We've lost 54,000 Americans more than the Vietnam War. And in Dallas County, other than Harris County, we're the most impacted county in Texas. And we've had, unfortunately, upwards of 80 deaths, and we've kept that number down, though, because of our folks' compliance with these stay home, stay safe orders. And I really think that North Texas has done an incredible job. We've done better than the modeling thought that we would be able to, because people have complied better than they thought that we would. And so I really want to say that the sacrifice that people have put in can't be wasted. And that, what I mean by that is, it was intended to give our health system time to get ramped up so that we could test, trace, and treat to a capacity that where as we reopened and saw some cases come back, that it didn't cripple our healthcare system. And so we were buying them time. We were buying our system time, basically, so that we could reopen to a certain extent. But what I hope will be said by the governor is a fully fleshed out plan, not only for business, but also for workers and families, because we can't ask workers to go back to work if they're not going to have the protective equipment to protect themselves at work, and if they don't have anybody to watch their kids. Schools are going to remain closed. They've already said that schools are closed for the rest of the year. And I was raised by a single mother. Who would watch me if my mom had to go to work and I didn't go to school or didn't have camp to go to? That's a real consideration for folks. And so I'm hoping that we can have a comprehensive plan that we will move in stages to reopen, to see how things are working. And then if we have to, we might have to take steps back. But it just can't be a situation where we say, okay, all the restrictions are lifted, everybody can go back to normal life. That's not going to happen for a lot of reasons. But the biggest reason is because people don't have the confidence to get out there and engage in the economy. My mom is a breast cancer survivor. She's in her 70s. She's not going to go out to where people are gathering if she thinks she may catch COVID and it will be disproportionately lethal for her. So we have to give people the confidence, and consumer confidence, as we all know, in every aspect, is the most important thing for keeping our economy going. So, you can reopen whatever you want, but if nobody comes, it's not going to matter, right? So I'm hoping that we have a comprehensive plan. I want to support it at the federal level. I tweeted and posted today about a plan that has been introduced by Scott Gottlieb, who's the Trump administration former FDA commissioner, and Andy Slavitt, who used to work in the Obama administration in the healthcare side, to try and have basically almost a wartime effort to dramatically ramp up testing, but also tracing. And this is where I want to just say one thing, is that we're going to have to hire hundreds, if not thousands, of folks to help us do contact tracing in Texas and across the country, so that we're not going to do it through an app. It's not going to be like South Korea or some of the Asian countries where you get a notification on your smartphone that you came into contact with somebody who had COVID. There's a lot of reasons for that. My mom doesn't even have a smartphone, so that's one reason, but it's also some security issues, and we have more concerns with privacy and security in our country. So it's going to require a workforce, and Massachusetts is already doing this. Massachusetts has hired folks to help them, if you are test positive, help folks work through who they've been in contact with, to contact those people, to help them get a test. That's how this works, and that's how we can move forward with some confidence.
Thank you. Couldn't agree more that we do need a comprehensive plan. A few weeks ago we had economist Ray Perryman on a very similar conversation. He stated, we get one shot. We get one shot at really reopening our economy, and I think we're fortunate that we have the opportunity to look at a lot of best practices that other countries have done, other states have done. So when Texas does give that green light, we can be the best prepared going forward for our residents, for our businesses, and really flourish on the other end, I hope. We're going to move on now to the Q&A portion of the program. First question I have is from Liz Beauchamp with Atmos Energy. Liz asks, Congressman Allred, thank you for your continued support of LIHEAP, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. $900 million was authorized in Phase 3 of the CARES Act, and we wanted to see if you had an idea of what kind of funding for LIHEAP might be available in Phase 4 for those who now more than ever need financial assistance.
Yeah, absolutely. We can have a discussion if you want to. We can talk offline about specifically trying to see that that's in our Phase 4 package, but I'm certainly a supporter of it. I want to thank Atmos for what they're doing, and an important part of our community. So that's something I think I would like to see. Obviously, everything we do is subject to negotiation with both the Senate and the White House and all of that. But I think that it should be part of the solution.
From a timing perspective, with Congress reconvene, I know Speaker Pelosi and Minority Leader McCarthy have been talking back and forth about whether it's proxy voting or other measures, because given the time we're in, trying to congregate the entire body of Congress is difficult. And we want to make sure that our members who are governing stay safe as possible, that families stay safe. So what can we expect timing on the next round of stimulus?
Yeah, well, I don't think the stimulus timing will be held up by our inability to gather in person. and it shouldn't be. We are. I'm going to get off this call and get on a conference call after this. That's probably going to last most of the rest of the day. So we're spending a lot of time on conference calls discussing our legislation. It's not the most efficient thing because we have to all speak one at a time, and as you can imagine, that's not easy for a bunch of politicians to do. But I wouldn't think that the timing will be held up by that. I think that we recognize that this is an ongoing crisis. We're going to have ongoing solutions and responses to it. We're learning in real time what didn't work in the first round of the CARES Act and what needs to be fixed. There were some, honestly, unintended consequences, like with the exception that was in place for some of our restaurants. We wanted franchise owners to be able to get access to PPP loans because a franchisee is a small business. They have they have a Chick-fil-A or whatever it is, and they have a number of employees, but they're a small business, and we wanted them to have access to it. But we didn't want the overall chains with these large publicly traded companies to be the ones. We have a separate fund for them. We have a separate fund for our large businesses that had over $500 billion put into it. And so, we're learning, but I think that we've had already a lot of discussions around this phase 4 package. And I think that I'm hoping from what I've heard that in the month of May that we will reach an agreement. What's going on here is, basically negotiations between the House and the administration, because if the administration wants to do it, then the Senate usually wants to do it as well. And so that's kind of the dynamic that we're seeing right now. And I think that Secretary Mnuchin, our Treasury Secretary, has recognized the need for us to take these dramatic steps that we have taken. That's one of the reasons why these pieces of legislation that we passed, both the CARES Act and the supplemental, passed basically unanimously. I mean, you couldn't get the entire Congress to agree on the color of the sky, honestly. I mean, you really couldn't. And so it's pretty remarkable that we've passed almost $3 trillion now in mitigation efforts unanimously through the Congress. And so that's going to continue. The one thing I want to add, though, is that we have to be able to do our job in terms of oversight as well. And I don't mean this in a negative way. I mean this in a positive way. Part of the Congress's role is to appropriate funds and then to make sure that those funds are spent efficiently, they're spent in the best interest of the public. And so, during World War II, we had the defense production was this enormous industry that a lot of money was being thrown around, and we had to have these kind of committees come together to make sure that they could oversee how that money was being spent and that our public funds weren't being wasted, even though it wasn't a negative thing. It was to help and to make sure that our public tax dollars are being spent well. So Truman, ran one of those committees. He rose to prominence through that, and of course became president later. But I think I'm hoping that this committee that we formed recently can also do that to make sure that your tax dollars are spent efficiently and not wasted, and certainly that we can fight any kind of corruption that might be there.
We're running out of time here, but did want to, first of all, thank you so much, Congressman Allred, for joining us today. Before I turn it back over to Dale to close us out, I'd like to especially thank both Judith Tinkle and Josh Stewart on your staff. They're awesome to work with and helping pull this event together for us. So thank you to both of them. Hope they're listening on the call. And two, we have a lot of people at home right now. I'm going to make my pitch for the census right now. So Texas, as of today, is, I believe, at a 48% response rate nationwide, which sounds amazing, but that ranks us 38th in the country in response rates. So, for everyone tuning in, please tell your friends, please tell your family, go and. I'll turn it over to you, Congressman, for any last or closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Matt. And I just want to thank the Chamber, the Dallas Regional Chamber, for always being so supportive of the efforts that are going on right now, whether it's DIC's efforts to continue to feed our kids and to provide them with the tools they need, or to try and help people find access to the jobs they need, or to help some of our other businesses repurpose themselves to maybe make PPE or make hand sanitizer. It's been incredibly inspiring to see our North Texas community come together to try and combat this. And I think that we are learning just how interconnected we all are. And I've said this for a long time now, but we have an incredible corporate culture in North Texas that I think believes in the things that I believe in, certainly, but also things that move our entire society forward. You know, there's a reason why I think people want to come here, and it's because they can get access to a strong workforce. They know that there's going to be a climate that welcomes them, and that, I think, all of those factors are still going to be there when we emerge from this crisis. But I will say this, and I want to, you know, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but this is going to be an ongoing thing for us. And I think that we in public office, those of us who are having these discussions with our public health officials, need to recognize and be honest with people about the long-term implications of this. And that, yes, it's possible that we may be able to, you know, wrestle this virus to the ground and basically hold it down, but it's also likely that we will have a recurrence later this year in the fall and winter. The director of the CDC said that just last week, and we will have to be prepared for that. And so just like in a wartime full mobilization effort, where we have to ask of sacrifices of each other and pull together and pull in the same direction, that's what we're having to do now, to try and ask all of us and all of our small business owners, all of the folks who have lost their jobs, to pull together and get through this crisis, but we have to take care of them as well. And that's what my office is here to try and help with. So for anyone who is on this call who's had any issues with SBA, with PPP, with any of the federal programs that have been made available, please feel free to contact us. If you have a family member who doesn't know where their stimulus check is, their $1,200 or whatever it might be, you know, we can help with that as well. We are full-time constituent services. That's our biggest focus right now, is to help folks get access to these funds that we've made available and to these programs that we've created. Because if it doesn't get out there, it doesn't matter. And so that's what we're trying to do. And, you know, this is my home. I care deeply about North Texas. I think that we are going to come through this, and I think that we will come through with a better understanding of our interconnectedness and of how when we all have access to opportunity and to healthcare and to all those things, that we are all better prepared for crises. And I think that we're certainly learning that right now. So thank you all for having me today. Thank you for your work. My office will be here for anything that anyone on this call or who watches this needs, and we are happy to do it. So if we can be of any help to you, please just let us know.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Dale, at this point, we'll turn it over to you, sir.
Congressman, thank you for being here. It's so wonderful to hear. You're inspiring, and you're also very candid about what's ahead of us. And so we all need to hear both messages, I think, today. Matt, great job moderating today. Thank you so much. Those of you who couldn't hear me originally when I talked, I told folks that Matt is fairly new to our team. He joined us about a month ago, but we're so lucky to have him. He's been a pro in public policy for many years in North Texas. And Chris Nielsen, who was our chair last year and is one of the top leaders at Toyota, executive vice president there. Chris, thank you for sponsoring this today and for all you and Toyota are doing in our community to get us through this. So with that, we'll say thank you all, and thanks for those who participated, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.